We've got a few dedications.
Okay. All right, yes. Okay, we are dedicating this edition of the Alshech HaKadosh for Refuah Shlema for Chaya Bat Leah, or Refuah Shlema for Binyamin Ben Leah, or Refuah Shlema for Noam Ben Tami, or Refuah Shlema for Yehuda Yonah Ben Sarah, and Le'ilui Nishmas Kuna Ben Mechel Yankel, whose upcoming yahrzeit is on the 10th of Shvat. I'm sorry, the 9th of Shvat. Okay, so this episode, the misleading title is The Horn and the Hoof, or, I'm sorry, the unicorn, or The Horn and the Hoof. Okay, so first let's look at the pasuk. I'm sorry, just lent it, you'll see. Okay, so we're going to look at Perek Gimel. Sorry, 1 second. Pasuk Chaf Beis, and we're going to read a drop of Chaf Gimel. Here we go. Vayomer Adonai Elohim, Hein Adam hayakach mimena ladas tov v'ra ve'ata pen yishlach yado v'lekach gam me'etz hachayim v'chal v'chay la'olam. We read this last time. The last piece was on this. So what happened was, right? Havai Elokim said, "Behold, man has become like us to know the difference between good and evil. Now, lest he stretch out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever." And the gist of the last piece was, and we still have to just address the last piece of the last piece that we said I had homework, so I'm just going to address that now. Okay, so basically we said that on the face of it, the pasuk looks like God says, "Uh-oh, now that he's become one of us, we got to get rid of him." Mm-hmm. And the Alshech HaKadosh, he turns it on its face, and he turns it all the way around, and he explains that really it means that since initially he was meant to be like us, to know good and evil without affecting him, however, he has mitigated his physical being, now he won't get his tikkun. He has to die in order to get his tikkun for his body to be upgraded again after Tchiat HaMeitim, and therefore we have to get him out before he eats from the Eitz HaChaim and lives forever, because as long as somebody needs their tikkun and they're learning Torah like David HaMelech and Rabbeinu HaKadosh, the Malach HaMavis can't get him. And the Alshech HaKadosh asked them, why does it say, Pen yishlach yado, he'll outstretch his hand, vilakach, and he will take, v'achal v'chai la'olam. So the last piece, as far as I can tell, that last little piece, and it says that God said, because this seemed to be a matter of contention last time, where Adam Rishon said, I thought you just meant, like, I shouldn't eat from the tree, but as long as I tango with the tree, I could poke the tree, I could smell the tree, I could lick the tree, then it's not a problem. So God's saying, listen, it's impossible to separate, right, messing around with chachma chitzoniut without coming to heresy. So last time he said, when you tell me not to eat something, I thought you meant not to actually eat it, but I shouldn't, but I could mess around with it. So God is saying here, we want to avoid all that, just to make sure that last time when I said don't eat, I meant also don't even touch. So over here he says, now that we had a problem, pen yishlach yado. Okay? That's how I understood that last piece. Okay, so now, moving right along. Pasuk Chaf Gimel. Vayishalcheu Adonai Elohim migan Eden la'avodas ha'adama asher lukach misham. What a mysterious pasuk. God sent him, Havai Elokim sent him from there, from Gan Eden, to work the earth, la'avodat ha'adama, to cultivate the earth, asher lukach misham, that the earth that he was taken from. Vayigarish es ha'adam, and then the next verse says, and God, he evicted man, but vayigarish means to divorce. Vayishkon, and he settled mikedem lagan Eden. To Rashi says the only Rashi on these two psukim are mikedem lagan Eden. Mikedem means east of Eden, like the John Steinbeck novel. Okay, right, etc. Okay, I'm not going to read the rest of the pasuk now because what's relevant for us really, the comment is going to be on the pasuk before, but he's going to here. I'm going to.
Can I just ask you on this fascinating? I didn't really recognize that this ligaresh to divorce, because we understand in our relationship with God and the Jewish nation, He can never do that.
It's straight out in the pasuk. It says vayigarish es adam. What does girish mean? So the Tanit Ve'Eliyos says straight out, Milamed shenasan lo gerishin ki isha. He gave him divorce like a woman. Am Yisrael is different. Am Yisrael he chose, but here he divorced man. So how deep is the implications of the divorce? Obviously, we're going to have to address it. But straight on the pasuk, and Tanit Ve'Eliyos says it's deeper than you think. It's a real divorce. It's not a joke.
Right.
Okay, but expulsion, right? Gerush Sfarad means expulsion. We use it to be exiled, but the truth is, it says, so here's the question. Here, this is what I wanted to say before, okay. It says in the first verse, it says, Vaishalcheu, he was sent out from Gan Eden. Why? It says, we have to explain what this means, but to work the earth that he was taken from. And then it says, afterwards, Vaigarish et Adam. So Vaigarish et Adam does not mean he was expelled, because Vaishalcheu means he was sent out. So what's Vaigarish coming to answer, going to add? So Pashtos, it's even an extra, so we have to see. And obviously, Gerish over here doesn't mean actual divorce, because it's, maybe it does look like it because he puts a guard in front of the entrance to Gan Eden, meaning I don't want you back. But if he intends for him to be back, then obviously it's not a real divorce. But let's see what the Alshech HaKadosh has to say. Okay, so remember the verse that we're going to go on is Vaishalcheu, that he was sent out, that Avaya Elokim sent him out from Gan Eden to work the earth that he was taken from. Let's see what that means. Okay, we are, in my edition, we are on page
54.
Yeah, okay, the last two lines of page 54, Nun Daled, Vaishalcheu Hashem Elokim. Here we go. Tzarich ladat, we have to know. Ma ha'avodah zot, what is this service or cultivation of the earth that God is sending him out of Gan Eden in order to do? Hayim lacharosh shilcho. Did he send him to plow a field? Is he going to plow a field somewhere? But you can't enjoy Gan Eden until you. We just said that the earth was cursed because of him, and there's no value. Meaning it's going to be unrewarding. It's going to be laborious and painful. And now he's being sent to. What does that mean? Okay, ve'od, and further, Amro. The verse says Asher Lukach Misham. He was sent to serve which earth? Specifically, the earth that he was taken from. Who miutar? That's extra. We know that he was taken from earth. His name is Adam because he's come from the Adamah. So what do we mean to service or to cultivate the earth that he was taken from? Ve'od. And furthermore, in the next verse, the beginning of the next verse, Amro, it says, Vaigaresh et Adam. He expelled or divorced man. Hare hayachutza. He already was outside because the previous pasuk says that he was sent away. Kishilcha, he was sent. Vechigarsheu. How could he expel him achar shekvar yatsa, after he's already exited? V'hine Rabbeinu Zal Amro. So Chazal say in the Medrash on Echa Rabasi, Shedanu b'shiluchin v'gerushin. He was sentenced with shiluchin, to be sent away, v'gerushin, and expulsion. V'gam b'divreim, and also according to their words, Ra'oi lasim lev al kefel inyan. Why do they say both things also? They mention shiluchin separate and gerushin separate. What are these two categories alluding to? V'hine l'Rabbeinu Zal, and according to our sages, ki megarish ha'isha oseh shnei dvarim. It's because included in divorcing a woman, there are two issues. Aleph, number one, she mishalcha mi beito. He cannot be in the same domain as her anymore. He has to send her away from his house. Beis, the second issue is shekaris beino leveina beget. He has no relationship to her anymore with the papers of divorce. With a get, he severs his tie. So there's two issues here. There's not being in proximity to each other, and also severing the connection, which entails things deeper than rights and obligations to each other. So there's this spiritual connection, but also there's this casting away. There's two separate issues, okay? In fact, the Gemara says that a person should not live in the same chutzner, in the same complex with a woman that he previously divorced. So too God, just like this, God sent Adam from the garden. V'gersho, and then he cut him off, meaning he divorced him. Sheyeh kikares beino leveina. He separated, the word karet, as a verb, it means you could, like when you make a covenant, you're karet to brit, it means to cleave, but it also means to separate. Spiritual excision is karet. So both to come together, two parties coming together, and to separate, what's a good word in English for something that severs a bond between two people? But whatever it is, their bond is totally, meaning when they're cut, they're saying to cut the bond between them. Okay, ke'inyan, like the verse in Yeshayahu says, avonosechem hayum avdilim. It was your sins that separated. So it's interesting here. He's saying that he's drawing from this verse, and this verse does not mean permanently. it means that the connection, normal connection, which should be, is being severed. There's blockage because of sins in between. The Tanya explains that when a person sins, they're actually separating the hay from the lower hay from the Yud Kei Vav Kei, the last hay, and then when you do tshuva, so your cord, in the mashal that he talks about it says Ki Yaakov b'char lo ya Yisrael iskulos. 1 second. No, it says Yaakov chevel nachlato. That a chevel is a rope. So a person's his neshama is bound to Hashem before he does a sin. It's a strong connection, and then somehow through sin it can get severed. But with tshuva, you can tie the two ends back together, and the knot makes it stronger than it was before. So you see that this thing is somehow repairable, and yet we're talking about a real sever. I'm just mentioning here that based on the pasuk that he's mentioning, even though we're talking about a get, it doesn't seem to be exactly right, because here, if a get is compared to the separation of avonot, then that's something that you can rectify.
But it's interesting that in the mashal from the human perspective, you can remarry your wife unless you're a kohen.
Yes, but I was just going to say before you said that there's actually a mitzvah, a special mitzvah called machzir gerushato, which means that there's a special mitzvah to marry a woman that you divorced before. However, you are not allowed to. It's an issue in the Torah if she got married to somebody else in between.
Right.
The exception to this classic exception, which was an exception in many cases, was Amram and Yocheved. Amram, first of all, and Yocheved, according to the laws of the Torah, it's an illegal marriage because she was his aunt. And although it's a mitzvah for an uncle to marry a niece like Mordechai and Esther, it is an avera for an aunt to marry a nephew. That's why the Torah chooses to keep them anonymous there, because there was nothing wrong at the time, but it shouldn't be right. But actually, what happened was, if you'll note that when Nadav and Avihu died, or actually, was it Eldad and Medad or Eltzafan and so it was Eltzafan and Mishal? There were two. There was offhand, I don't remember exactly, but they had. Basically, the ones that came to take the bodies out were children that Yocheved had with another man. When what happened was, the Gemara in Sota says that Amram decided to. Okay, this weird digression because it has to do with Parshas HaShavua, kind of, but it's really not on the point. But basically, what happened was Amram decided that we're not playing ball. God has put this evil king upon us who's dumping our babies into oblivion. We're not gonna play this game. We're boycotting. So they decided to separate their wives, and Amram separated from Yocheved, and all the men separated from the women. And Miriam said, "You're worse than Paro, because Paro only goes there on the boys, and you goes there on even the girls, and Paro only goes there on Olam Hazeh, and you're not even giving them a chance at Olam Haba, etc., etc." So we know that there was an interim where we thank God and the Nashim Tzidkanios for seducing all the men, that there should be further generations in Mitzrayim, until Amram decided, you know what, I'm taking her back. So in that case, she actually married somebody in between, somebody who wasn't in on this boycott. Amram was and she had kids. And that is usher, that's an extra, meaning nowadays, after the Torah was given, you cannot marry a woman that you were previously married to if she was married to someone else. If she was married, if she specifically had chuppah and kiddushin that required a get, then you wouldn't be able to. But in the event that she still hasn't been married to anybody, and you guys decide to get back together, it's actually a mitzvah. So even though the divorce is actually totally legal and she can marry anybody else and she's not precluded, however, there's still some sort of preferential reason that makes a case, if you were married to her previously, a mitzvah. So you see there is something restorative somehow, even though the bond is cut. I'm just mentioning that, putting that out there. Anyway, okay, let's continue. Ve'al derech hapshat. Okay, the simple explanation of what's going on here. Yomar, we will say that, okay, here you go. You guys ready for the unicorn?
Yep.
Okay. So, do you remember the last time we mentioned the earth that he was taken from? Do you remember where we mentioned that? A couple verses ago, God says to man that until you return to the earth that you were taken from, because Adama, ki afar ata, because you are dust, and to dust you will return. So he said the difference between Adama and the afar is that Adama is not talking about that he has to die and be buried in the ground. The Adama over there is Asher Lukach Misham, that he was taken from, is talking about the Beis Hamikdash, right? We said that David HaMelech was going to come back to the Beis Hamikdash, and then the spirit of impurity will leave the earth, and then the klala of the earth will, right? So we already had this phrase before, the earth that you were taken from, and it was a reference to the Beis Hamikdash. So let's, right, in our pasuk it says, right, that God banished him, he sent him away from Gan Eden to serve the earth that he was taken from. Well, last time that meant the Beis Hamikdash. So clearly here there's some sort of avoda in the classic sense, avodat Beit Hamikdash, or service sacrifice. Okay? I'm giving you guys a clue. Okay, so now, there's a Gemara in Shabbos, B'Hazkir Ma'amaram Zal, al pasuk Vatitav LaHashem Mishor Par Makrin Mafris. You have a Tehillim handy? Okay. Okay, so in chapter Samach Tet, in Pasuk Lamed Beis, it mentions that something was pleasing to God more, greater than the... Here, I'm going to read it. Lamed Beis. This is a very ornate, adorned edition. Okay. Okay. Ahalil Hashem Elohim b'shir va'agatlenu b'toda. So David HaMelech says that he will praise the name of Elohim in song, and he will make him great. He will bring to his greatness b'toda with a thanks offering, a thanksgiving offering. And this particular thanksgiving offering, vititav lahavaya, it will be greater to God. Mishor par makrin mafris, from the ox, the bull, makrin mafris, that had a horn, has a horn and has a hoof. The horn and the hoof. Okay, so the Gemara says on this pasuk, this is referencing a particular carbon that was brought in history that had a horn and a hoof. And Chazal say, Shehu karban shehi kriv Adam Harishon. Adam Harishon was the first one to say Tehillim. He said Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbos, and he was the first one to bring a carbon before Cain and Hevel, and it was the shor of Bereshis. It was one of the original, the ox. And the pasuk describes it as makrin mafris. It has a horn, or it uses its horn, and it used its horn, and it used its hoof. Okay. V'ra'u laidat. And it's important to know, be'ezes man hikriv. This is a reference to some carbon that Elohim Rishon brought. When did he bring it? Kilo nizkar b'parsha. It doesn't say anywhere in the Chumash, right, in this story, that he brought a carbon. Ve'od, and further, lama lo hayi lo ratzon be'etzem. David HaMelech is saying that what I'm going to bring is even greater than that particular carbon. That means that he's noting that that carbon was not 100% satisfying as it could be to God. What was it lacking in? Why didn't it totally or essentially rise up to God beratzon, that Hashem was desirous of it? She'omer, that the verse says, "Vatitav laHashem mishor par," that it's greater, that what David HaMelech is bringing is greater than the shor par. Shehikriv Adam Rishon, that Adam Rishon brought. Sheyora ki lo shalem haya b'karbano shel Adam. That seems to imply that Adam's sacrifice, it was not complete. It wasn't perfect. And according to our approach, nashit lev el ma'amaram zal. Let's turn to the Gemara in Chulin. The words of our sages: she'amru shor shehikriv Adam Harishon karnotav kadmu liparsotav. So there's a beautiful agada, another little snippet in Chulin, that says on this story that the actual animal that Adam Harishon brought, its horn preceded its hoof. Yes, maybe. We're going to explain symbolically what this means, but that means that like its horn was longer than its hoof. It preceded it. Shene'amar makrin mafris, because it puts the word horn first before the hoof. Ma inyan hakadima azot. So the Alshech HaKadosh says, what is the meaning of this precedent that the horn precedes the hoof? What's Chazal trying to tell us? Ve'im hu cholek al ma'amar. So you should know that there's two deot in this particular story. One de'ah says that the fact that the pasuk says Karen, it only had one horn, makrin. So this animal only had one horn. Okay, but there's another mandama that says no, it wasn't a unicorn. So okay, so ve'imhu cholek al ma'amar ha'omer, and if this particular opinion argues on the opinion that says that Parsha Hikriv Adam Rishon, the bull that Adam Rishon brought as a sacrifice, Karen Achat Hayalo b'mitzcho, it had one horn in its forehead. By the way, you should know this is the second time we're discussing this in the Alshech so far. Shenamar Makrin Mafris, because the pasuk says Makrin Mafris. Makrin Ktiv, it's one horn. My question on him is that if Makrin means one horn, Mafris means one hoof. So maybe it rode a unicycle. But anyway, it says Makrim means it has one horn. Okay? So Kihine ein safek shebimispar karnotov chokin. They're clearly arguing about how many horns it had. Ki haomer karnotov kodmod. He who said that the meaning of the verse is that the horns preceded the hoof. Mora kishnayim. He said karnotav, both horns. V'lo echad bilvad kedat haomer karnachad. So he says, there's two not versions of the story, but we can make inferences based on the language of the two opinions that there's an argument here. That one says, what was the problem with this animal this sacrifice, is that the horns preceded the hoof, which means that it had two horns. And another one says it only had one horn. So we're just going to parse it out and flesh it out, okay? So, the truth is, this is not really significant. This is not a machloket whether it had two horns or one. What they're really talking about is the symbolism of it all. What they both agree on is each one of these opinions, they had two different questions when they looked at the verses. Echad, the first question is, what is the lacking in this bull, that there's something to come for God later that will be greater than it? What was it lacking? Why does the pasuk seem to cast aspersions on the completion of this offering by Adam Rishon? Okay, and the second question is, what is it coming to tell us about this particular animal when the verse says, Shaya Makrin Mafris? When he uses the word, it had a horn and it had a hoof. Every bull has got horns and hoofs, so what's it adding? Okay, so they want to address two things here. They want to address what is the lacking, where's the problem here, and what is the pasuk trying to tell us, what's the significance of Makrin Mafris? Okay? Vidat ha'omer harishon, and the thinking of the first opinion is that kiba hakatuv lahashiv v'lomar tam al meshiyitav l'Hashem mishor par shel adam rishon. That the part of the verse that says it had a horn and a hoof is explaining why it was lacking. That is what it was lacking. Mipnei shahaya karnotav kodmot lepar sosav. He's saying, you know what the problem with Adam Rishon's karban was? That it was a karban that the horns, it doesn't matter how many horns, it's that the horn or the horns preceded the hoof. What is the significance, the symbolism of the horns preceding the hoof? Kilomar, that is to say, kiba al avon, it's coming for sin, it's a sin offering. Kikadmu negichotav lahazik becheto leparsotav shehem simane taharato. So, the horn is the strength of the animal that's used to damage. And the hoof is the sign of its kashrut. So in the animal, you have its destructive part and its kosher part. And this particular animal, the significance of this karban was brought for a chatas. Meaning what was lacking is, Hashem said, oh, Gevalt, you're bringing me a karban, that's great. It's too bad that the first karban had to be because you messed up. And it's a sin offering. So the significance of this sin offering was that the horn preceded the hoof. The hoof being a sign of kashrus, and the horn being a sign of destructive power. Okay? So according to the Mandamar, who says that the pasuk is explaining what was lacking in the karban, and it was that the horn preceded the hoof. It doesn't matter how many horns there were, right? It just means that the horn, meaning this was for a destructive act, he's coming to be mitaken something. Okay?
It's suggesting that Adam should have given the korban before the sin.
Well, it would have been great if the first karban of existence was, hey God, I want to build a relationship with you, meaning before something goes wrong. Yeah. Okay? Vidat ha'acher, and according to the second opinion, hakatuv noten tam b'derech acheret. It's giving you, so according to the second opinion, he wants to say this, what was lacking in the carbon was a different reason. V'hu me'ein ma'amaram zal al elo shel Yitzchak. So this is beautiful. There's another midrash that describes the symbolism of the ram that was brought instead of Yitzchak by the Akedah. And we all know that it has two horns, and those horns are reserved for very, very elevated and significant things. Okay? Kishnei karnav ho'ilo. It had two horns, and both the horns was the power for good. Echad l'shofar shel Matan Torah. The left side, the horn was used. You know, it says that there was 5 kolos by Matan Torah. That's the 5 kolos of Chatan v'Kala, right? And it says shofar, kol shofar gadol chazak. What does it say? Right. Does it say ma'od over there?
I don't think so.
Okay. Right. Kol gadol v'lo yosif. Okay. So the shofar over there, that was the left side of the from the aisle of Yitzchak. And echad l'shofar, right? V'shal yamin l'shofar la'atid lavo she'yitaka b'shofar gadol. Taka b'shofar gadol l'cherutenu. The ultimate, right? The calling for the final redemption is going to be a big shofar, right? It's the shofar gadol. It's the big tekiah. So that's the right side. Okay? So you see that horns aren't necessarily, in this approach, the horns are not a reference to a destructive act which would demand a rectification of a sin offering, but rather it's the power of this thing. Because it was not the carbon also, the Akedah was not brought for a sin, right?